It's a really great pleasure for me to propose this webinar today on mental health and psychosocial support in the COVID-19 context with my colleagues from TDH in Greece. One thing that I need to clarify before we start. This webinar has been prepared taking in consideration global interagency guidelines, and there's really a lot being developed recently, as well as TDH guidance developed on the subject of MHPSS, but also based on our experience of needs and challenges faced by refugees and migrants communities in Greece. As TDH is mainly intervening in shelters, in the camps, and in urban areas in the mainland Greece, we lack first-hand experience of the specificities of the current situation in the reception islands. So we hope that this forum can be an exchange of information also on challenges, practices, and recommendations that we will be presenting. As Anastasia was just saying, we have planned, we hope, an interactive presentation. We will have some specific moments where you are proposed to ask questions, but if ever you have any questions that are critical for your understanding, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. For this reason, if you don't understand, if there's something that was not clear, please raise your hand while the presentation goes. We will have a specific moment, more or less at the middle of the presentation, for you to ask questions. So, as I said, if it can wait, please do wait this moment. So next slide, please, Anastasia. So as I was saying, I mean, this presentation is really built on some key MHPSS resources. Just one thing I need to clarify here, you will see within this presentation a lot of links or examples of resources that can be very practical. We had done this exercise of going through the recent guidance that has been developed, and we are trying, we hope that we have done the selection and that these resources are pretty practical and then can be really supporting your everyday work. So just for you to know, after this webinar, you will receive the whole list of the reference documents that you will see appearing during this presentation. So the objective of the webinar, first of all, it's to highlight, of course, some of the MHPSS consequences of this specific context, epidemic context. We will then propose a framework that can help us identifying which are the key MHPSS intervention that should be proposed. And this framework should help you to better frame your action. We would then propose some practical and priority MHPSS intervention. Of course, we haven't been exhaustive. It would be just impossible. But we try to highlight some type of intervention that we think should come in priority in terms of MHPSS support. And final but not least, we'll go a little bit more in deep in one of this type of intervention, which is the psychological first aid, as a key tool for multi-purpose and cross-sectoral tool to provide basic MHPSS in this context. So before we go on with the presentation, we thought would be very interesting, because there are quite many of you on the webinar today, to have an idea a little bit of your background and your specific area of work today. So we ask you to fill up this poll, just giving you a minute to just try to capture the type of work you are involved in. This would be useful for us also to know a little bit about the audience today.
So Maria, I am also here and I am taking care of this polling process. We will still wait for few more people to vote, and then I will screen the results.
Great. I mean, this is just to say that, I mean, the way we planned this presentation, the idea was we had all these different kind of area of work in mind, and it's still interesting to see a little bit some of the focus we could have linked with your area of work.
Perfect. So we already have the majority of the participants that have voted. Please, if you have not clicked on the submit button, do it now in order to have your answers as well. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks. So that's quite interesting. So we've got mainly psychologists, which is good for this thematic. We have equal numbers of child protection workers, social workers. We have some humanitarian workers, and we have quite a lot actually of other sectors. So I guess that this could relate also to legal, maybe advisors, and maybe other area of humanitarian work. Thank you. So let's start then, and just asking this first question: why is MHPSS so important to consider in the COVID-19 outbreak? What I'd like is that before we go in some of the global facts around the consequences of MHPSS at different level, we would actually like to hear from you. We would like some of you to be able to tell us a little bit, what have you been observing as frontliners in your different job in terms of the impacts of this COVID-19 epidemic on the mental health and psychosocial well-being of the different people you're working with. So I'm just proposing that you can, whether you can propose some answers in the chat, or we would be very happy to also hear some of you. So don't hesitate to raise your hand to give us some hints.
So, Maria, there are already some answers in the chat box.
Yes. So yes, stigmatization of the people affected by COVID-19, and this is something that we see very often linked with the situation of epidemic, and this had happened previously with the Ebola also in Africa, where actually people that were affected started to be stigmatized. Fear, panic, agony, so we've got some very strong words here. Confused feelings, high stress level, confusion, isolation. I think isolation is one of the factors that raises really substantively the stress levels. So yeah, we have a lot of uncertainty. I think this is very important. Uncertainty, actually, this is very specific to this epidemic. I mean, we could have epidemic that we know about. This epidemic is a new epidemic, a new disease that we don't know much about in terms of what's going to happen, what's going to be the effect. And so this uncertainty is creating a lot of anxiety, because we don't know actually, we don't know exactly the nature of the threats.
Maria,
yes.
I already see two people who have raised their hands, so could I proceed and allow them
please.
to talk? We start with Eleni. Eleni, you can now unmute your microphone. You must have received an invitation from me. Okay, let's wait for Eleni to step in later on. I will give the floor to Maria. Maria, you will also receive an invitation right now. So if you see it, please unmute your microphone. Okay, our colleagues have already been invited, but maybe there are some technical issues.
Yeah.
Maria, we can continue with...
I will proceed, yeah. Just a few other answers that I'm looking at that are around the fact of having issues with planning for the future. This is what we were saying earlier, that it creates a lot of stress because we don't know what's going to happen next. And of course, I'm just seeing now also it's even more difficult for people with pre-existing mental health difficulties. Oh, we're having Maria with us. No? It seems it works.
Not anymore.
So we're seeing in Castoria, extremely measures has created fear. Being locked down is something really new for a lot of people to that extreme. And I'm seeing also some hints about, you know, child protection issues that might get worse with this situation, and we'll come back on that. Yeah, so I mean, we have some of the keywords that are coming back a lot that are stress, fear, uncertainty, anger, and the rising of previously already very sensitive situation, whether people having mental health issues or pre-existing child protection issues. So let's go on, let's move on. So, I mean, there is a lot that has been said, and this is just some of the facts that we know about this epidemic, is that there are a lot of fears around falling ill, dying, losing livelihood, being excluded, placed in quarantine, feeling powerless in protecting the loved ones, and fear of being separated also due to the disease. Looking at specifically some specific target and population, we know how difficult it can be also for parents that fall ill, how to deal with their children, some refusal to care for children that need support, whether they are unaccompanied or separated. We know how it can be difficult for people with disability, and also, of course, the elders that are today the most at risk with this epidemic. And of course, feeling helplessness, boredom, loneliness, and depression. All these consequences can have potential long-term effect within the communities. And we know that if nothing is done, and we probably can already witness some of these consequences. We see a deterioration of the social network. We have more and more stigma towards surviving patients. As we heard also, have we seen in the chat, a lot of anger, frustration, and this anger can go against the government, and the frontline workers are being the ones that are trying to give a response to this epidemic. But also the rise of protection risks against children, spouses, partners, and family members. We know that there's a lot of an increase of family and intimate partner violence. Possible mistrust of information provided by the government. So this makes it also very challenging to then make sure that we communicate the right information. And of course, as we said, people with developing or existing mental health disorders can experience relapse and other negative outcomes because they are avoiding, for example, health facilities, or they are unable to access their care providers. So next slide, please. As we also see now, some of you already started to speak about some of the vulnerable groups where there are some, as we said, there are higher protection risks in this situation linked with the isolation, the quarantine, the containment, and this can create additional MHPSS distress. So some of the protection risk we spoke about when we spoke about stigmatization can be discrimination, violence, whether domestic violence or violence against children, separation, grief, and also just the fact that you have limited or sometimes even no access to health services because they are just overloaded. Sorry, with COVID-19 patients. So we have just listed here some of the vulnerable groups that should be looked at more closely. We have here a list of additional resources. Again, we will provide the links to all these resources, but we see that already the international community and local organizations have really started working hard and putting together a recommendation, looking at all of these different vulnerabilities, whether we speak about gender or already marginalized people, disability, or children in detention, for example. Next slide. So just to end up maybe this first part on a more positive note, we know that some people may have, despite the situation, can have some positive experiences, such as pride about finding ways of coping and resilience within the communities. Faced by disaster, community members often show great altruism and cooperation, and people may experience some satisfaction about helping others. And this kind of support can be done in different ways. You have people that will try to support elders, for example, to maintain a minimum social contact. And this could be done through phone calls, text messages, or ensuring that through the radio there can be really supportive messages. Sharing key factual messages. We'll see later that, for example, youth can be a great population to mobilize within the communities, to be able to look for real facts and avoid all the myths that we hear about around this COVID-19 epidemic. So next part, this is where I was mentioning earlier that we decided to add this part to just give you a little bit of a framework. So hoping that it will not sound too theoretical, but we know that there's so much need and so much to do in terms of mental health and psychosocial support. Sometimes we might just wonder where to start. And some of the questions we need to ask ourselves, of course, would be, first of all, I mean, prior to all this question first, what are the needs? And what are the needs is the needs for whom? You know, what kind of support is needed by who? What type of services are needed? And here I'm referring to the pyramid of intervention, the MHPSS pyramid, where we want to know there might be some intervention that are needed by everyone, because everyone is confronted to a certain level of stress linked with this epidemic. But you might need also to go for specialized services, really looking at the most affected people. Another thing is also wondering, you know, just can you go back to the previous slide? Thank you. It's looking at the kind of objective we need to pursue in terms of MHPSS support, and we'll give you an idea of some of the priority areas that we should keep in mind. And finally, what are the specificities of providing MHPSS support in this context? So you can move on. So first thing is, of course, when we speak about MHPSS support, it's so wide. We need really to take in account that you have all the ecological framework that you need to refer to. You've got children, families, community, and the whole society that will need a level of MHPSS support. This can be mainstream or targeted. What I mean here is that you, and we will speak about that with PFA, is that what is very important is to understand that MHPSS is not just about individual counseling session. It's about how do we, in emergency situation like this, integrate MHPSS support in all type of intervention. And this could be done through health, through people responsible for food distributions, through a lot of different actors. And of course, looking at this ecological framework, we know that some intervention should target everyone, the same intervention, like access to information, and we'll see that this is really key for MHPSS. But you might also need to have some specific intervention linked with the specific needs and risk of some population. Don't forgetting, of course, without forgetting, of course, the vulnerability groups. That means, for example, how do you support women that might be at risk of domestic violence at home? And of course, not forgetting in this whole panel, the frontliners. Next slide. So here, I guess that most of you know this pyramid of intervention. This has been issued by the Interagency Standing Committee on Mental Health and Psychosocial Support at global level some years back now, but it's still very much used. What is helping us with is just to clarify again that bringing MHPSS support can be done at different different levels. You have all the MHPSS and social consideration, basic services and security that are key for everyone to feel safe and to feel capable of coping with a situation. You have activities that need to be provided directly at family and community level. And this is really to strengthen resilience and to try to maintain a minimum level of well-being. And then you have the level 3 and 4. Level 3 is about providing focused support, for example, for unaccompanied minors and so on, but with no yet clinical expertise needed. So level 3 is about focused support, but not looking at expertise in terms of clinical or social specialization services. And what is important with this, why I'm showing that, is that actually when we think about bringing MHPSS support, we constantly need to have in mind the blue arrow that is here, that is the MHPSS continuum of care. And this is very important to know that if you will intervene, for example, at the level 4, and you are providing specialized psychological support, you need to know and you need to make sure that you have some supporters, services that will provide the level 1. That without it, the person will have difficulty to actually get better. So there's really an interaction with all these different levels of services that really need to be kept in mind. Eleftheria, do you want to come in here? Maybe just to tell us a little bit about the situation in Greece regarding this pyramid?
Okay, thank you, Maria. And let me also welcome everybody from my side. Actually, I could share the experience we hold so far regarding here in Greece and regarding TDH operation in open accommodation sites across Greece. So actually, I will start by saying that we were not prepared for addressing this situation, meaning that we didn't have any policies, procedures, or lessons learned that were contextualized, so we can have a foundation and move on. So we had to be engaged in a more of a trial error approach, trying to focus mainly on keeping the connection with the people in the sites and exploring the needs via the feedback we had from the frontline workers and the people. So I would say that MHPSS support is a very challenging situation. It remains very challenging situation, even though we hold a variety of resources and guidelines. So, so far, what TDH and most actors and public services are engaged concerning the refugee migrant context is the remote, let's say, MHPSS support, focusing mostly on individual session because all group activities were ceased, emasculating this feeling of connection in the sites. And the truth is that there is a great gap in delivering MHPSS and PSS messages to the people in the field. I have very few examples of some CFS and PSS messages delivered through the distribution of some books and materials, but they're very limited and few. And of course, many hotlines were established, and there are a lot of flyers and communication material, but there is a gap of if this material actually reaches the person that they were designed, or if there is a more further support needed to this. Many webinars like this, so we can support, as Maria said, the frontline workers as well. And of course, what TDH is engaged is the problem management plus intervention, but we will talk further about this. that has to do with individual session psychological support to people impaired by distress. I will have the chance to talk further about this, but our main focus and concern is to keep the connection with the people, trying at least to keep the minimum standard of our quality services and ensuring procedures that the remote counseling is done the correct way. But we will talk, Maria, further about this. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this feedback. I think that, yes, indeed, I mean, and that shows that, I mean, having sometimes some of this analysis is helping. You know, you might see here that you might have a lot of, or you might have some level 4 activities, but then what about the other levels? You know, what can be done? And just now, if you can go to the next slide, link to what you were just saying, Eleftheria. I'm just showing this. This is TDH well-being framework, and you'll see on this little, on the right corner, some of what we call internally the well-being pillars. So you've got 5, which are feeling safe, feeling connected, feeling worthy, feeling respected, and feeling hopeful. And of course, all these pillars of well-being are very strongly interrelated. But when thinking about this type of crisis, for me, what becomes essential is first to think about, you know, priority comes to first looking at the feeling safe and feeling connected, especially with this epidemic that really is isolating people from one another. So feeling safe, this is feeling safe, calm, and having control, which are really basic elements for any human being. So it relates to emotional internal aspect of protection, feeling protected and having control over risks, and that could be external, physical and internal emotional threats. And it's also key to think about, linked with the stability, the need for as much as possible, the establishment of a sense of normalcy or predictability over changes. But we know that this specific point is really challenging today, because we know that predictability is, I mean, no one knows what's going to happen. So it's really putting a lot of stress. So there are ways to work on that through other channels to try to put back this feeling of predictability on things that we can control. So of course, feeling of a sense of calming, this is emotional regulation capacities that contribute to a sense of control capacities and allow really also have a very important impact in allowing increasing survival capacities and access to basic needs. Access to basic needs actually for me is also very, very crucial. We need to really think about this type of activities also. For me, it's also an MHPSS intervention, because if you don't have people accessing basic needs, the coverage of essential food, water, medical care access, it can really create high distress. And in the other way, if you have access to those services, it can also play an important role in terms of the sense of calming. And knowing where to go to get support, to get whatever support, essential services or specialized services like psychosocial support is also an important aspect of feeling safe. Feeling connected, of course, is essential for well-being. It's obvious for young children whose survival depends mostly on the caregivers, but it's also true for any human being. So relationship and connection are also key for accessing survival-related information. Peer support as well. So supporting meaningful support network and promoting connectedness. I mean, we know how this can be challenging in this situation, and I would say even more with vulnerable population like refugees or migrants, where there might not be so easy access to the internet connection, and this can be challenging. I just want to highlight that it's not because I'm not putting an emphasis on the other pillars that they're not important. And actually feeling worthy and respected and the dignity that we need to support people with are also very important to consider in terms of the way we will bring the support. And this is what is captured here in the transversal principles. allowing, and we just spoke about that, about feeling safe, allowing people to have meaningful participation and being in charge of supporting the response is really key in order to promote also relief in terms of stress. I just listed here also some types of intervention. We'll come back on that in the next part, but that are for me the key intervention we need to think about when we think about these two pillars, which is really having access to information, ensuring daily routine, try to see what can be put in place to help with this daily routine, of course for children, but for everyone. Supporting this sense of calm, this management, this stress management, accessing basic needs, support specifically for caregivers and families who are living in a very challenging situation as well. How to support communities' engagement with these challenging issues of not being sometimes able to go and meet these communities. And the high attention that needs to be around stigma and the importance of, when we speak about feeling safe and feel connected, it's even more important to think about the specificities of the vulnerable group we work with around these two areas. Next slide, please. So now we've seen the who, we've seen the what type of services, we've seen the what type of objective we should pursue. I think that this is also the how, which is really, as Eleftheria was just saying, a big challenge. This is extracted from a recent guidance from UNICEF on MHPSS support for families and children. So we will give you all the links later after this webinar. That just enables to just capture the reality of what can be done according to the different contexts where you can or you can't move, when you can or you cannot meet the people. And maybe one thing I want to really emphasize here is to say that we know that obviously we say, yes, let's work remotely, but as Eleftheria was saying, this is not something you can invent overnight. And there are things to really be careful of. One about confidentiality is one of the key questions around remote support. How do we ensure also safeguarding? How do we manage if we come across a high risk case that needs to have immediate interventions? So all this needs to be thought through, and we speak about that later. All this information should be actually captured in a kind of protocol that will really help the helpers actually to know how to deal with this situation and to feel more comfortable. And of course, in some situation, you still can go on the field. I want to really have a special attention here about one thing that is about, of course, ensuring the protection of the people going on the field. And that means ensuring that they have information on prevention measures, but also that they have proper personal protective equipment if this is needed according to the context where you're working. And another tricky point, I would say, it's about high-risk cases, as I was saying, because what I can hear, and I think this is also the case in Greece where we're working, we are mostly doing remote support, but it can be that for some very high risk, we need to go and meet the person. And I think that this issue of knowing how you can combine both approaches, when do you decide that you go and meet the client, is very important. Another issue when we speak about remote delivery is also about working with communities. And I will have a quick say on that later about working with communities. That doesn't mean that then they're going to take the risk that you are not ready to take in terms of providing the services. So there's a lot of thinking to be done about how do I work potentially with some local committees, organizations, or focal points within the community, and what can be done to support them to have a role, taking in mind also thinking about their own protection. So just speaking about that, because I'm advising today a lot of different contexts worldwide, and I can see that actually this issue of how to do remote support is a big challenge. So we had just here another quick poll for you that will give me also an idea. These are two basic questions to know how if you are today involved in providing remote services, and if you think that you are enough equipped for that. Do you have enough knowledge? Are you sure about what you're doing? And yeah, so these are the two questions that can be interesting for us to poll today.
So the poll is on, the polling process is on right now, Maria. We will give another 30 seconds for it. Just to mention that we have over 220 people participating today, which is amazing. So I'm looking forward to the results of this poll as well.
Yes, yes, I'm seeing a question. Is interpretation considered as a remote service? If you are doing remotely, yes, yes, sure.
We will give another 10 seconds and then I will screen the results. So thank you very much everyone for voting for this poll. I'm now proceeding to see all the answers.
Okay, okay. So this confirms a little bit some of the I would say the global, worldwide feeling that I had until now. That so we can see that 2/3 of you are already involved in remote services, but then don't feel enough equipped for that. And overall, I can tell you that there's a lot of discussion at global level to try to develop more support tools to support the frontliners in knowing what to do and how to do that challenging shift from direct services to remote services. We'll come back a little bit on that a little bit later. So we keep that in mind, and we'll go to the next part that is looking at, and I think that some of the things we will see now has been already we already started discussing it. But these are about concrete example of the MHPSS COVID-19 intervention. What we decided to do here is to propose this intervention based again on the MHPSS pyramid level of intervention, to have an idea of where they can be situated in the overall panel of services in terms of MHPSS support. So next slide. So here, obviously, for me, maybe you are adapting previous intervention you were doing, maybe you are about to launch new intervention that were not existing before. What is really important to recall is that anyway, anything that should be taking place, ideally, of course, I know that this is very challenging today, but should be based on an assessment of the needs to really fit the needs of the specific community we're working with. And I know, and I don't know if this might come as a question later, but there are challenges in doing this assessment, obviously, because of the situation and not easily accessing people. And this is the next point, that you should really thoroughly consult with children, adolescents, and adults, different stakeholders. But even sometimes if you can't do that face-to-face, there are ways to think around it, to ensure that their voice are being heard in terms of what are the needs and what needs to be, what would they need in terms of solution and services. Mapping the services, this is essential for you, whatever level you are working on in the pyramid, is really how I'm going to be able to refer the person I'm in front of that might need other types of support. Coordination is very important for information sharing, integration of MHPSS services in the other activities. There's a need of coordination between the different actors in one given site, camp or shelter. We spoke already about the need and possibility of remote services and establishing protocols. And I also try to emphasize on the need to really have a very strong policy in terms of duty of care, to make sure that we don't put our colleagues or ourselves in a more in a challenging, even more stressful situation. And of course, something key, and this is what is already being launched with this webinar and all this webinar happening, it's really enabling people to get trained and to get access to information. This would be, for MHPSS, it could involve lay workers, social workers, health workers, lawyers. I mean, I have seen that we have some that need to have basic information on how they can, at their own level, also provide MHPSS support. And of course, PFA, psychological first aid, is one of the ways that really can benefit any kind of any intervention. Next slide. So very quickly here at the level 1, and we spoke about that, that means really basic needs. Access to information around this epidemic is crucial. We know that there's a lot of rumors happening, there are myths around this epidemic, and again, I'm really deeply considering this as a very important MHPSS intervention. Is people need, because of this anxiety, this uncertainty, the more information they can have that are from sources that are checked, the more they can at least have a sense that they have some information. So there's a lot of different ways of convening these messages. It can be through frontline staff, and sometimes you might have food distribution happening, and you will work with these people working with food distribution to see how at their level they can provide a minimum of information about the epidemic and the protection measures and so on. Leaflets, radio, TV messages, SMS by phone. There's a lot of different ways. And what is important here to keep in mind is also that you really need to continuously think about the different level of the ecological framework. You need to give information that are child-friendly to children, that are adapted to communities, specific vulnerable people, and so on. And so there is here a lot of examples that we are displaying, some that are there's a great WHO page where they are really tackling some of the myths that are heard around the COVID and giving answers around it. There's a lot of leaflets adapted for children. And I think here Eleftheria has also included the document that comes from the government. Eleftheria, do you want to come in here on this specific intervention?
I think, no, you have covered me.
Okay, we'll keep it for the end then, maybe, for if you want to add anything. I'm just conscious of the timing, and I really want to ensure.
Yes, that's why. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So, of course, here in the overview, I needed to add something about psychological first aid. I will not stop here on it because we'll come back on it later. We'll go a little bit deeper on PFA, but just for you to know that it's really an intervention that is easily usable for any kind of person, even with your surrounding environment, not only professionally, but that can really make a difference for people psychosocial distress. So we'll come back on that later, so I jump on the next slide. As I was saying earlier, a lot of challenge around engaging communities because we've got difficulty accessing them. There's not, sometimes you are not allowed to go in, sometimes there's a lot of challenge in maintaining all the distance, the proper distance and so on. Again, what I want to highlight here is that what is important is if you work with communities, for them to be a relay in the communities, you need really to take in account also their own protection, safety, health, checking with them regularly. And then in terms of specific activities, I've put here a link to a document that again is very practical. And it's how to put in place risk communication with the community plan within a community. And it goes through really step-by-step ideas on how to collect and assess what's happening, what does people know, where they know it from. how to coordinate with the other actors that are doing maybe some intervention. Identify then what are the key people that you need to target with your messages, and who can really be within the community some supporters to relay these messages. And then finally propose a proper strategy where you identify who can do what at community level, again, to ensure the engagement of the community. Next slide. So of course, when we speak about the community also, we're thinking about the youth, teachers, it could be leaders, it could be any community actors. And here we just did an emphasis on two. Youth, I mean, we know how much in general and also in crisis, youth can really be very active supporters in trying to put in place a response. They've also been affected, of course, and you need to have specific formats for them to share their emotion, to have access to the information. Here again, I put some links to two great platforms. I think both sponsored by UNICEF, and this was not done on purpose, but I think that they are great. One that is about the U report, that is really a free mobile empowerment platform that gives access to millions of youth around the world, where they can actually express what they feel, and also get information and take action actually, and decide to take action to see what they can do at the community level. And the youth voices is a little bit the same, where the youth can really testify what's happening for them, how they can get engaged, how they can support the communities in these difficult times. For the teachers, when we've been discussing with Eleftheria, she told me that this is also something that needs to be taken in account. I give you the floor, Eleftheria.
Yes, just a very short but very important comment, at least as far as I'm concerned, about the teachers, because sooner or later we're going to be back to our daily routine. So both teachers in public schools and in non-formal education settings, in the accommodation sites and other urban settings, need to be prepared about how to support children and to manage the effects of this disruptive life event that they have already experienced. So they need somehow to be prepared, to hold the knowledge. So for me, it's very important to request for trainings, or to have some trainings available concerning the preparation of the teachers when they enter the classroom, because they need to re-establish the relationship and the support with the children, having also this experience from this disruptive life event. So for me, it's very, very, very important to consider this.
Yeah, thank you, Eleftheria. So next slide. So here we are speaking here about now access to information and awareness, but not on the COVID-19 epidemic itself, but some of the stress management messages that can be given. And again, there's a lot of documentation that has been issued that can be used for parents, for children themselves, for youth, and for communities. Again, some of the examples here, we will send you the reference. There are very, very practical tools that can be used, translated and disseminated. Again, we know that the challenge today is around how to disseminate these messages. And there are a lot of options. And I think this is something that needs to be also, as much as possible, coordinated between actors in a given site or in a given environment, to see what will be the best way to really share this information. Recently, I was in discussion with some people from Lebanon saying to me that, or Jordan saying to me that they are trying to set up a system where, because the only providers, the only service providers that can go inside are food delivery providers. So they are trying to combine with them actually to have, at the same time as the food distribution, to have some messages that can be shared, and some psychoeducation exercise that can be handed out to families for their children, for example. Next slide. So, of course, one of the key to be able to deliver support is ensuring capacity building. Of course, on the epidemic itself, but not only. Stress management, I mean, we had our first webinar by Eleftheria 10 days ago around that. This is key. PFA is another one. And also, as I was saying, a big need I feel around adaptation of activities to remote. How do we work remotely? And especially because it's a health crisis, the importance of working with health actors to really mainstream MHPSS support within the health services. And how, of course, we've got this type of webinar. There can be networks, having different actors coming together, sharing good practices. There can also be training organized internally by some organization. And there are great online libraries. I know that it can be overwhelming because there's a lot out there actually that can be looked at. But even if once in a while you go and see in this specific here network, you have sections around MHPSS and community work. And I think it's really worth having a check sometimes because, again, there are very practical tools that can be used also, I guess, in your daily work. Next slide. So this is around, of course, level 3. We are around focus care, about some specific people that need additional support. And this is just, again, to re-emphasize that social workers are also in the one of the key MHPSS actors in this situation. Case management is recognized as an essential service in a lot of contexts where, if needed be, they can still access the field. Of course, again, taking in account the protection and all the precaution that needs to be taken. But that means they can really also play as an important frontliner in supporting the feeling of safety and the feeling of connectedness of some families. Yes, next slide. So here I'm going to hand it over to Eleftheria, maybe just to give us a quick brief. I've seen that we have a lot of psychologists on this webinar, so I guess that most of you are familiar with this kind of targeted, specialized psychological support that are mostly done individually today with the condition that we have. And so TDH is providing this scalable intervention called PM+, Problem Management Plus, which is a 5-session curriculum or follow-up that can be done with some clients.
Mm-hmm. So currently we are trying to initiate this project. As Maria said, is a 5-session brief psychological intervention provided by lay people who speak the language, the language of the beneficiaries, and they target mostly in managing stress, managing practical problems, improvement of mood, strengthening the social support and behavioral activation. And the good thing about this project is that it is delivered in the language of the beneficiary, so no interpretation is needed. This makes easier the remote MHPSS support, and it's very practical and brief. It fits to the current context, let's say. So currently the Problem Management Plus facilitators are having just the first intake and assessment in person because it's a rather long assessment, and then they follow up over phone and applications. And you can have more information in the link.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Eleftheria. So of course, one of the key here is really to ensure, again, having an idea of what are the options for referral. Huh? When you do, especially if you do more lay counseling, you need to make sure that you know where to turn the people to if you feel that they are putting themselves as high risk or they are becoming really in a very severe distress situation. Next slide. So coming back on the issue of working remotely. Here again, there are two of the guidance that exist today that will also send you the link to, that are really great resources because very practical. One has been developed for the global level and the other one is something that has been issued actually in Lebanon. That is a guideline for the provision of remote psychosocial support to caregivers when you're doing, for example, case management. And both of these documents, again, are very practical. It gives you an idea of how to set up a supportive space, the big issue of developing trust that can be really challenging over the phone if it's a new client, someone new that you are meeting for the first time by phone. Highlighting the importance of maintaining privacy, confidentiality, and what about data protection? How do you record consent, for example, when you are in a process of providing support? And so all of these very specific questions, you have some hints in these documents. When we spoke about safety protocols, of course, we are speaking about protocols for managing risks of harm, including child protection issues, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and so on. We're also speaking about how to develop a safe place to discuss sensitive issues. How do you do that symbolically, but also physically, you know, especially if you want to, in some places where we know that there's only one phone in the family. This also asks you to think about what's going to be the communication adaptation you need to put in place. To maybe have shorter discussion, look at the frequency, and again, thinking about always making sure that you're speaking to the right person when you are engaging for the first time, for example. And this is around the crucial point around confidentiality. But also the issue of supervision. How do supervision work when you do counseling on the phone? And this is something that needs to be really taken into account seriously. Otherwise, you put yourself as frontliners, but also it can put the relation at a high risk if you don't have this kind of support. So there's data protection and confidentiality, and also the issue of engagement. So yeah, let's go to the next slide. So here, we'll just I'm conscious about the time. We'll go through the PFA section next. But I just wanted to hear a little bit from you after having this whole 40 minutes, more than nearly an hour of presentation. Just, I don't know if some of you want to share a little bit about some of the intervention you are involved in that you think are crucial that we were not mentioned today. If this is possible, again, it's very difficult to be exhaustive. And if you want to share with us some of the challenges you're facing.
So I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, Maria, I'm also a bit conscious of the time, so I would suggest that we move on to PFA to make sure that we are going to have enough time for it. And
yes,
at the end, we can have an open discussion and include these questions as well. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go on then. Next slide. Next slide. So Faye, maybe first, the idea was to have a poll maybe here. Anastasia, I would be very interested to know who is already knowledgeable about PFA and who has never heard about it. So can we launch this quick poll? Great, thanks.
Let's give it another 30 seconds. The majority has already voted.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. I will now proceed to screen the results.
Yes. Okay, half, huh?
Mm.
Not so many people actually been trained. Okay, okay, thank you. So, I mean, maybe just to say that the presentation we have in here will give you an idea of what is PFA, and will probably make you even more interested to be trained on PFA. It's not something that it is huge in terms of timing to be trained, but this cannot be done over an hour, I would say. I know that I heard just before this presentation that actually some organizations in Greece are planning to do a webinar and a training on PFA. So just for your information, I've been using for this presentation, PFA is an approach that is used since a long time now. And there has been already in these last 2 months some adaptation done from different organizations about using PFA for COVID situation. So I'm using here the guidance from IRC, and you can see at the end of this presentation, I will again give you some references of other documents that is also speaking about how to provide PFA by phone or remotely, because this is another challenge. So maybe coming back on PFA. So overall, I mean, I think what we need to say is that it's an approach and a communication strategy, I would say, that will help people to feel safe, to feel connected, to feel calm, and to feel hopeful. And we see that this is very linked with our objectives of what do we need to achieve today in this kind of emergencies. It's also helping people to know that where they can have access to social, physical, emotional support, and also giving them the feeling that they can be able to help themselves as individual and community. So PFA is something that is very practical, that helps you assessing needs and concern in a short time, also making sure and helping that people can address the basic needs. It's a way we really listening to people. It's not looking at pressurizing them to talk. And the objective is really that the communication and the dialogue should help the person to feel calm. So the idea is really to put in place a communication mode that will really help the person in front of you to feel less stress. And it will really help people to connect to information, services, and social support. I will not come back on what it's not, but one thing I want to highlight is that it's not a therapy and it's not counseling. It's a really basic support that you can bring to the people, and you can do that whether you are a health worker, whether you are a person in the camp providing food distribution, or you can do that also as social workers with a more proactive role. So yeah, next slide. So anyone can be, for who is a PFA for? I would say that it's really for anyone. It can also actually be for frontline workers like all of you. And so it can be used by management, it can be used by colleagues for one another. And as I was just saying, it can really be, it's easy to integrate it in different. There are 5 basic principles, and I will not come back on them. We just spoke about them, but it's really the objective of this, the structure of the approach of PFA. It's really to be able to provide safety, giving information, and connecting the people to where they can have information or support if they need. Is helping them by the way you will behave, giving them the access to relieve some of the stress and being in a mode that allow them to express their emotion. It's really also looking at connectedness, because the idea is really to look at with the person to option. How can the person continue to be connected? Who around can help? And this is also linked with point number 5 about there are probably people around them that can support them, individuals, family, services, and really realize that the person in itself have the capacity to actually be supported. And of course, the hope by simply being present, listening, giving practical options to the person that might feel sometimes completely blocked in his emotion and way to function can really be supportive. Next slide. So PFA traditionally is looking at, I would say, 3 main components that we usually say it's look, listen, and link. These are the 3 main blocks normally of PFA. As you've seen with this adaptation of the PFA with this specific situation, and given the fact that we need to do it remotely, there has been a replacing of the look with the engage. So let's come about all the steps. The first step, of course, that is a step that is obviously needed, is the preparation, and we spoke about that, the importance of knowing how you will engage, what communication means you will use, how you're going to manage confidentiality and so on. These are things you really need to put in place before you start planning for supporting people with PFA. And also having yourself, knowing actually all the services available around the person to be able to give accurate and proper information. This is a really an important part of the preparation phase. Engaging, and here again, it's about really starting, of course, engaging in a really adapted manner. And the idea here is really having information on how, on the level of safety, of distress, dysfunction, are the person affected in their daily functioning, do they have access to basic needs, what are their priorities, what are the type of supports they have around, and what are the needs that they have overall. And of course, we see here that the crucial aspect is about the way, the active listening communication that will be put in place. And I guess that most of you know to what I'm referring, but we're speaking about the tone of the voice, speaking calmly, slowly, in a sensitive manner, being able to paraphrase or to even validate or rephrase what the other person is saying in order to really be able to put the person in a comfortable situation to share their feeling. And then, of course, in this in this phase, you also need to really actively listen, and in the next phase, to listen and to know what is the level of intensity, frequency, and duration of some of the symptoms that they might have in terms of psychological distress. And that will really help you to know then how you can, and this is the next phase, link this person with social supports according to the level of distress, what can be done with existing supports surrounding the person, and again, giving information about services that are existing around and that can help the person to actually at least have a sense of control of knowing where to go, what to do according to their situation. And this last phase, the link is one of the key is really encouraging coping strategies, positive coping strategies, and really helping the person to identify that they might have put things in place that they should continue, and give them ideas of things that they can try to put in place in order to have individual, I would say, coping strategies. Next slide. So I already spoke about that the specificity of the PFA in COVID is that we replace the look that actually normally is done by visual when you go in a place and you can identify people's distress. It's also important to think about what are the ways you will use PFA remotely. Ideally, it's better if you can have visual contact and not only auditive, but this depends a lot of the infrastructure in place and the communication means of the people. And again, I mean, some of the tips that are very important to keep in mind when you are doing remote support on the phone, where you should even more be very conscious about the way you're going to speak and the type of communication with open questions and really reassuring the person. On this, you really have very complete guidance on using PFA and every steps for answering a call, for example, and using PFA that has been issued by IFRC. And this is the next slide, where I've tried to capture here some of the recent resources. Next slide. That has been developed around PFA, specifically around whether epidemic outbreaks. We have one that comes from the Ebola crisis in West Africa, and the others that has been recently issued. And there's also a Greek guidance that we captured here in these references. So we have covered the whole points that we wanted to discuss with you. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time, but we still have some time left. So I will be very interested to have some of your questions, or coming back to the question earlier about what are some of the interventions you want to share with us that you think were not discussed about, that are key, and also about challenges that you'd like to share.
We can always dedicate time if there are questions. I would also encourage you to address them with Maria Bray, because she will be able to give you some answers, and it's a unique opportunity to address them now. Eleftheria, I would also like you to step into the discussion and maybe add some comments or final thoughts and ideas that you have thought about so far.
Mostly, I would like to motivate you to raise your hands or to write in the chat and just address some questions you might have. We may not have the answers, but we can elaborate, because it's a space that we're sharing right now. So let's take the chance and just write in the chat if we don't want to speak. For example, I would like to hear how you manage with the remote counseling, because we are facing a lot of challenges, and we cannot be sure if we truly deliver quality services, or we're just making phone calls to make sure that everybody is okay. I would really like to hear how you manage with this.
The content, just coming back on what you said, Eleftheria, the content itself of the way you will communicate with the people that you might be having support previously is of course need to change, you know. And I think because of the context and the environment being different, this can't be just another session like you used to do by phone. There are some adaptation to be done, and again. This PFA approach, probably for psychologists, it sounds quite basic, but it's good to have this recall of what are the things that you need to keep in mind that can help at this stage with the level of stress of people, addressing the situation itself, beyond maybe the other issues one was supporting this person previously, can be, I think, a good recall and a good tool to use also.
Because as we said, our main focus is to find a way, even the slightest one, to keep the connection.
Yeah.
Even if this is just a monitoring phone call and not a proper session, because as Maria, you already said, we have to adapt the context based on the guidelines you showed to us previously.
Yeah. But so I would be really interested to hear about any MHPSS intervention that you really like to share, or challenges. I'm looking at the comments in the chat box, and for sure someone is saying that I guess that this relates to PFA, that it can also be with small talks that anyone can have with people, whether they are in a camp, in a shelter, in a site, where they actually can use this systematism of engage, you know, listen and link. And this is really a good way of systematically knowing on how even that with small touches can really help the people.
Maria, just a quick question from me now that I'm also reading the comments that come directly to us or shared with everyone. I wonder on which level the communities are engaged in dealing with the situation, because I mean, most of the time, for example, on the reception islands, the conditions sometimes are harsh. What are they doing there? Or in open accommodation sites, what kind of interventions do they come up with themselves, and how they discuss about their ideas, for example, with the service providers?
Yeah. I would be interested if anyone has concrete examples to give us on that. I think that what is a challenge always is that when you have such a crisis, you always have the first moment where people are freezed, you know, people don't know what to do and how to react. But very often you always have within a community, within a setting, some people that will be trying to stand up and try to see quite soon what can be done. And I think that and that's why it's key to assess the situation when as external we come in to support, because sometimes there are things that has been put in place, some neighbors that will support each other, and this is important, I think, for us to try to also promote this inside support mechanism instead of trying to put in place something that might destroy this mechanism that were there, that was starting to emerge. So I think that for me, of course, external support can help people that have the intention of doing something, whether it's spreading information, supporting people to access basic needs, helping elders to go and take the food and bring them over to them, or maintaining a kind of a phone discussion every day with someone that is really lonely. And I think it's or even supporting organizations to know where are people with disabilities that can be helping need extra support, and all this type of intervention within the community are really, I think, to be promoted, and because they also give, as I was saying previously, a sense of control for people that can be really important in this time.
So there are some other comments that have been sent to us right now.
Yes, I'm seeing them now. So Ellie is telling us that, yeah, it's important to organize our own tasks at the first place and then organize our action and services. Just to understand, I don't know if you want to come in, Ellie, but just to understand, are you speaking about the different type of services that should coordinate?
So there is a raised hand. It's Ellie who will receive now an invitation to turn on the microphone.
Yes, yes.
Perfect. So.
Hello.
Hello, Ellie.
You can hear me. Oh, thank you very much for the presentation. Well, I'm speaking about the fact that, first of all, I believe we have to organize ourselves and our own tasks. And then, if it's possible to have beforehand a plan how to act, it would be very useful. But sometimes it's not possible to have such a plan beforehand. So then try to organize our actions and services. Well, I'm speaking from my own experience as a project coordinator in a youth center, that I saw that first of all we had to organize how are we going to work remotely and be in contact with the colleagues, and then or maybe if not then, maybe at the same time try to organize, okay, how are we going to be there for our for the people we serve, and how are we going to provide them our services.
Yeah, yeah, no. As you say, we are all affected. Okay, the organizations, the frontliners, personal life, and so on. And it's true that I mean, I think we all have been through it. I've got kids myself. I'm dealing with work and kids at the same time, and it's of course you at all levels. At one point, you need to at the same time think how you're going to manage your task, and then thinking about also the other side of the people you work with and how you're going to bring this support. And ideally, of course, I think that you need to have this time, this little time of reflection that needs to think about how I'm going to deal before dealing with the rest, because the risk is that then you project your own stress and anxiety about how you're going to manage in your intervention. So ideally, yes, when you work with an organization, you've got also other people at the organization level that can help you with supporting also this thinking about how things are going to work. But yes, what I understand also in what you're saying is that we are all, yeah, there's different levels of addressing MHPSS consideration in our work. Thank you. I'm looking at other comments. A challenge I and my colleagues are dealing with is that some beneficiaries, instead of being alerted, they underestimate the consequences. I don't know if Antonia wants to come in.
Antonia, if you want to elaborate further on your question, you can raise your hand and I can give you, open the floor to you to speak. Perfect. We have Antonia with us. I will now send you an invitation to turn on your microphone.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi, Antonia.
Hello?
We hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I work in Florida. Well, we're dealing with this problem.
We have an issue, Antonia.
You know, some benefits.
Antonia?
Instead of being alerted and stressed,
We cannot hear you, Antonia. So we had an issue with the connection of Antonia, so I needed to mute your microphone. I'm sorry for that. But you can
yeah, I just want to
elaborate on the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, you can elaborate, Antonia, if you want by chat. I just want to say that, yeah, we have that in a lot of contexts where situation before the epidemic was already very bad, okay? And so for people, actually their daily life today is probably harder, but it was already very scary before. And I think that for some people, and a lot of people around the world would say that actually my main issue is eating every day, is not being fearful of having the disease. And I think that here we also need to take into account this when in the way we work. Of course, the way we turn this presentation today is very focused on looking at the COVID-19 situation. But I would say that we need to acknowledge that for some people, this is an issue. And I think that regarding the type of risk it can cause for them and for the others of not being serious about social distancing and so on, the only way to support that is really raising awareness and trying to have the appropriate messages sent about the fact that we understand that for themselves at their level, this might not be the main threat for their life, but that they need really to be conscious about the potential risk for others, because this could also create some further transmission. We have a feedback also coming back on the use on the sessions. and saying, of course, I think this is coming from Anastasia Mutakis, that is saying to us that yes, ideally, if you can have access to video calls, this is really, I think, already good. And for some of us, it might be a luxury. But I think that yes, indeed, it's much more appropriate if you could have the visual interaction to do proper sessions, and proposing that yes, at that time, you keep the phone for regular check-in and not so much for really deep psychological sessions. Yes, I hear some challenges of remote work in practice. And I know that we are even at our level in Terre des Hommes, we are planning to try to organize a training, in distance training for all our contexts of intervention, because despite the fact that you might have some guidance and so on, there is a real need, I think, for frontliners to be supported, because also this gives, for the frontliners themselves, this gives a feeling of reassurance. If they have access to information, they know good practices, this will also change the set of mind in which the workers are. Maybe another comment from Maria Fotopoulou, that is saying to us that one of the big challenges is that the educational staff has almost a family-like relationship with the students and parents, and now that bond is now broken and shaken. We miss the children a lot, and the misuse to remote communication doesn't always feel enough. Yeah, this I understand, and I understand it at different level also, because my son has the same kind of relationship with his teacher and with the classroom, and I think that there are things that can be put in place. Of course, it will never replace the bond that you can have physically, but I think that putting in place a forum where the kids that have access to this possibility can share, can even send information or drawings to be done and say, yes, do this, and you will bring it back when the school starts again, giving challenges to the kids, and putting them still in a dynamic of being related to the teacher in another way can be potentially ways in which we can work with trying to make sure that we don't break this link.
And I also see a last comment from Georgia that mentions that no actor had been properly prepared to deal with an epidemic.
Yeah.
I think nobody was really prepared.
No. I mean, I would say except West Africa, that recently had to deal with the Ebola, and even if it's different, it's very interesting discussing with them, because it's really, they have this experience actually of dealing with epidemic. But no, for sure, and I think that it was so sudden, first the epidemic, but also the decisions from the government of closing down, of containment, and no, for sure, I think this is something new, and I mean, unfortunately, I think it's good to be prepared, because we know that this is not something that it's going to be a one shot. We know that this can potentially come again. And so I think that all the investment that is put in today in trying to think about ways of investing in remote services and other ways of working are really relevant for now, but also will be for sure for later. Yeah.
So at this point, I would like to thank you, Maria. It was really nice to have you with us one more time in Greece. Every time that you visit us in person or have a session with us, it's really, really nice, and we really receive many things from your insights. So I would also like to thank Eleftheria a lot once again. We still receive your comments. You can still write whatever you wish for us to have in mind in the chat box. I will now proceed to the last two slides of today's presentation to just mention that there are some more webinars that are going to take place in May. and some last ones in April. But in order to be updated on that, you can visit our Facebook page. All the webinars are provided there. And last but not least, I would also like to invite you to answer to the satisfaction survey that we are going to share with you via email later on, to let us know what you did like from this webinar, what you would like it to additionally address, and answer the rest of the questions that you will find there. It will be really helpful for us. So thank you all for being with us today. It was really nice to have people that are working in every part of Greece. Thank you for your comments, your thoughts, ideas, and experiences that you shared with us. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the near future in another webinar, and hopefully in person soon, really, really soon. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much.
Everybody, and thank you,
Bye.
Maria, once again.